Mike and Hannah here with Delta Faucet. Today we're going to install a Delta Touch2O with Touchless Technology Kitchen Faucet. For this installation video, we'll be installing a Trinsic faucet in an Arctic stainless finish. But these steps will work for the variety of Touch2O with Touchless Technology faucets that Delta offers.
Now note that there are only just a few extra steps when it comes to installing a touch and touchless faucet versus a regular kitchen faucet. Also, these are battery operated, so there's no need for an electrician. We'll also teach you how to use this technology in a different video. And remember, like with any technology, issues can arise, so we'll be walking you through some troubleshooting steps in a separate video.
Let's collect the tools that we'll need to complete this install. A Phillips head screwdriver, and we recommend using a long Phillips head screwdriver, 2 adjustable wrenches, a bucket, a towel for some light water cleanup. You may need a flashlight, and of course, some safety glasses. All right, so grab those tools and supplies and let's get started. The first step is mounting the faucet to your sink or countertop. Now, if you have a 3-hole sink configuration, you'll need to use an escutcheon to cover the outer 2 holes. Now, for our sink, we have a single hole for the faucet, so we won't need to use the escutcheon. All right, let's move on to mounting the faucet. Now it's time to place our spout shank, our cable, and the supply lines down through the mounting hole. Now when you do this, you want to make sure that you don't rip this tag here. It's got important information on it. And you want to make sure nothing gets pinched. All right. This LED light faces forward, and that your handle is parallel to the edge of your sink. So this is when it's really helpful to have 2 people during this install. So I can be up here holding onto the faucet, keeping it straight and centered, while Mike is underneath tightening the screws.
All right, here we are under the sink, ready to start securing our faucet to our countertop. Now the first thing I want to point out is something Hannah mentioned previously about this little tag here. You'll notice it has your model number on it, as well as the manufacturer date of your faucet, which is information that could be very, very helpful for the Delta Faucet customer service team if you ever have any future questions about your faucet. So just keep an eye on it and make sure it doesn't get damaged during install. Next, we can move on to securing our faucet to the underside of our countertop. So to do this, it's going to take 3 things. First is this mounting bracket, followed by the mounting nut, and then we're going to tighten everything into place using the included wrench that came with your faucet. Now before we do that, I do want to talk about the bracket itself just for a second. First, you'll notice that there is a top and a bottom to the bracket, and the bottom side is the side that has these 2 preloaded screws loosely into the bottom of the bracket. Now just keep an eye on this to make sure you do have 2 there, because once in a while, one of these screws can fall out during shipping. Once you've got those preloaded in there, I'm also going to talk about this U-shaped gap on the back of the bracket, and what this is going to offer plenty of clearance for your supply lines and your cable as we tighten everything up to the bottom of our countertop. So the way this is going to work is we're going to take our sprayer line here. I'm going to start by feeding my bracket over the end of the sprayer line, and again checking orientation to make sure that the top of the bracket is going to come in contact with the bottom of my countertop, followed by the mounting nut, and I'm going to push this all the way up to the back of my sink to the shank of the faucet and start loosely threading the screw onto the shank itself. Start by moving my mounting bracket up over the bottom of the shank, again with this cutout on the side, making sure that my supply tubes, my outlet hose, and my cable aren't getting kinked anywhere. Also, I think it's a good time to point out, you'll see there's this little ridge on top of the mounting bracket that's going to fit up into the hole in the underside of my countertop. So I want to make sure that the shank is kind of centered in that hole. Once everything looks good, I'm going to keep moving it all the way up the shank until the mounting bracket is coming in good contact with the bottom of my countertop. Again, double check and make sure my supply lines and my cable are still all free and clear and aren't being pinched. All right, once that looks good, I'm going to take my mounting nut, start threading on the end of my shank. I want to make sure that I hand tighten it on easily. It shouldn't be cross-threaded at all. It should spin easily up the shank of the faucet. And once I get it hand tightened on there, I'm going to take my tool. Again, keeping those tubes and cable to the side, and then snug it into place. Okay, I've got that faucet snugly in place using that included wrench, and now at this point I want to check a few items. The first is making sure that I'm happy with the final alignment of my faucet up on top of the countertop. And second, I want to move underneath the sink, also verifying that I haven't pinched any of my supply lines or my cable. Once everything looks good, we can move on to securing our faucet into place. So to do this, I'm going to be using a Phillips head screwdriver. It's important to note that I'm using a Phillips head screwdriver because I don't want to over tighten these set screws on the underside of the bracket, because doing that could cause damage to the bracket, my faucet, or even the countertop itself. So I've got my Phillips head screwdriver here, not a nut driver or something similar. And also you'll notice I'm using a long Phillips head screwdriver because it makes it that much easier to work up behind the sink when we tighten up those screws. Once you're happy with everything, let's go ahead and lock that faucet into place. Starting with one of the screws, tighten this down. Again, I don't need to over tighten this. I just need it snug enough that's going to hold the faucet in place. And then going to the other screw, tightening that one down as well until it's snug. And I think it's a good idea to just go back to the first one. Just double check to make sure that's nice and tight against the bottom of my cabinet. All right, and that's locked our faucet into place now. Next, we can move on to installing our check valve. Now, the check valve itself is made up of two components. The first is a smaller little insert here called a ferrule, and the second is the check valve itself. Now, I'll save you all the details and the science behind why these are so important, but just trust me that they are required for the proper function of your faucet. So to install them, I'm going to start by using my hot supply stub out here. Again, taking my ferrule, place it gently in the end of my stub out, and then next I'm going to take my check valve, thread it over the ferrule, and then gently hand tighten it onto the end of my supply stub out. All right, now that I have that in place, we want to tighten this up enough to make sure we have a watertight seal between my check valve and the supply stub out, but I don't want to over tighten this because it could cause some damage to the stub out or the check valve itself. So I'm going to start by taking an adjustable wrench. I'm going to place it on my stub out. That way I can support it as I tighten up the check valve. And when I tighten up this check valve, I'm only going to go one full rotation all the way around. That should be enough to make sure I'm getting a nice seal between the check valve and the stub out. So I'm going to take my second wrench, place it over my check valve, making note of the location I'm starting in it, and then give it one rotation to ensure I have a watertight seal with my stub out. That wraps up the hot side. Now I'm going to repeat the same exact steps for the cold side, and they'll be ready to move on. All right, moving right along. Next, we're going to be connecting our supply lines to our supply stub outs coming out of the wall. Now, with any faucet installation, this is one of the most important steps, making sure that we're connecting the right supply lines to the right stub outs. So Delta's helped us out with this by color coding the ends of our supply lines here. You'll see I have a red side for hot and a blue side for cold. I'm going to be starting with my hot side here. Now, one thing you'll notice is for my installation here, the length of my supply line is about perfect for the location of my check valve here. However, if say your installation at home, the check valve was facing up, the supply line might feel just a little bit too long. So to help with this, one thing you can do is form a spiral in the line itself, which will make it a little bit shorter. Or if you even need it shorter than that, another thing you can do is actually form a loop in the supply line. However, if you do have to loop this all the way around, we just want to make sure that this diameter of the loop itself isn't any less than 8 inches across, because that could cause a kink in your line, which might lead to a flow issue. Once everything looks lined up, I'm going to hand tighten the end nut here to begin making the connection between my supply line and my hot side check valve. We're going to be tightening up our supply line to our check valve, similar to what we did for the check valve, rotating that nut one full rotation to make sure we have a snug watertight seal, but not so tight that we could cause damage to the supply line or the check valve. So just like before, I'm going to be using 2 wrenches, placing one wrench on the check valve to hold it in place, and then a second wrench over the end of the supply line nut. I'm going to make note of the location that I'm starting in, and then rotating the nut one full rotation just to help ensure a watertight seal. That wraps up the hot side. Now I'm going to repeat the same exact steps for the cold side. All right, now that we have our supply lines connected, we can move on to flushing our lines. Now what this means is basically letting water run through my system, up through my supply lines, through the faucet, and then back down through the outlet tube, directing that flow of water into a bucket. And the reason for this is that will help clear any debris that may have gotten in our system during the installation phase, because that debris could affect the performance of the faucet if we don't get it out of there. So the way we're going to do this is first making sure that my faucet is in the on and full mix position up on top of the countertop. So the full mix means basically halfway between the hot and the cold sides. Once that's done, I'm going to come back under here, place my bucket under the outlet tube and hold on to it to make sure I'm directing the flow of water into the bucket. Once I'm all ready, I'm going to slowly turn on both my hot supply stop and my cold supply stop, which will start the water flowing. I'm going to let the water run for say about 30 seconds or so, then go ahead and shut off both of my supply stops, remove the bucket and clean up any water that may have splashed around, and they'll be ready to move on to the next step. So once you're ready, let's flush those lines. Okay, so we've flushed our lines now, so at this point I'm going to take my bucket out, clean up any water that may have splashed around in here, and they'll be ready to move on to the next step. Next, we're going to move on to installing our solenoid, which is this unit here. Now the solenoid itself does have a top and a bottom. The top is this attached blue clip side with a little hole that the outlet tube that we just used to flush our lines is going to fit into. So we're going to be pushing this up on the end of the outlet tube and then clipping it into place with that blue clip. All right, we're going to push our solenoid onto the bottom of that outlet tube, top of the solenoid being the side that has that blue pivot clip. Push them together until they're tight, and then clip the pivot clip into place until it snaps. And I think it's a good idea to give it a little tug down just to confirm I've got a good connection there. Okay, now that we have the solenoid connected to my outlet tube, we can connect the spout hose to the bottom of that same solenoid. Now one thing I want to point out with the spout hose is remembering that this is going to be moving up and down while you're using your faucet. So we want to make sure that this hose isn't wrapped around any of my supply stub outs or any other of my plumbing that could affect that hose being able to move freely. Once I'm ready, I'm going to take my hose weight, slip it over the end of my tube, and then take the tube and the blue clip, pushing it onto the bottom of the solenoid. Again, making sure it's got a good connection. And then taking the blue clip, pushing on from the side until it clips into place. I like to give it just a little bit of a tug down to ensure everything's connected well. Okay, that wraps up all of our water connections. So now we can move on to connecting our wires. So the first thing I'm gonna do is grab my C-clip here, making sure that my sense wire isn't wrapped around anything else under here, shooting for about the middle of the shank, pushing it into place, and then rotating so the tail of my clip is facing directly away from my sink. Finally, we're going to connect our LED cable, again making sure it's not wrapped around anything or kinked in any way, pushing it into the side of the solenoid until it clicks into place and fully seats together.
Your faucet can be powered by C batteries or with AA batteries. For a longer battery life, you'll want to use C batteries, and to do that, you'll take out this insert from the battery container and then load your batteries in. If you want to use AA batteries, which are included with your faucet, you put the insert in and then load the batteries according to this guide on the outside of the container. Just like that.
Now on the battery container itself, I do want to point out that it does have a top and a bottom. The top is the smooth side, and the bottom is the side that has these little feet that the container will sit on. We're connecting it to our cap. We want to make sure that the side that has the wire coming out of it is facing the top of the container. We're going to make sure that those little clips on each side of the container fit into the side of the cap, and that it snaps into place to make a nice, tight connection. Now the position of your battery container is extremely important for the function of your faucet. We want to make sure that it's sitting on the floor of your cabinet, that it's got 2 inches of clearance from any back wall or side walls, as well as anything metal or any power sources. So I'm going to place it in the back corner here, making sure I have plenty of clearance. Also, we want to make sure that the power wire running from the battery pack to the solenoid isn't wrapped around anything else underneath the sink and has plenty of clearance away from anything else metal or a power source that could cause some interference. I'm going to be turning on my hot side and my cold side supply lines, allowing water to run through my system. And the spots I'm going to be checking for leaks are at the bottom and top of those check valves that we installed earlier, as well as the bottom and the top of the solenoid. So once you're ready, let's go ahead and run some water through our system and check for those leaks. Okay, everything looks great under here with no signs of any leaks. So now we're ready to move on.
All right, now it's time to check for leaks up top. So I'm gonna turn our faucet on, and I'm gonna check for leaks right here where our sprayer hose meets our wand. That looks good. And I'm also gonna check for leaks at our handle. All right, they both look good, so we're ready to move on. All right, the final step of this install is to check functionality. So first, let's check the functionality of our Touch2O technology. So we're gonna turn our handle on, turn it off by touching the handle, turn it on by touching the spout, make sure I can move it around without it turning off, and then touch the spout again and make sure it turns off. All right, let's check the functionality of our touchless technology. So I'm gonna place my hand within 4 inches, turns on, and then place my hand again, turns off.
All right, everything is looking and working great, so that wraps up this installation. We hope it went well for you, and remember, if you have any additional questions, you can always reach out to the Delta Faucet customer service team. They're more than happy to help.